Okay. So we were discussing about functions, right? So by far we have discussed about the number of ways we can pass the parameters in a function, right? कितने ways होता है? How many ways are there to pass the parameters? Yes, tell me. कितने ways होता है? 3 ways are there, right? Which ones? Call by value, call by pointer, and call by reference, right? These are the 3 ways to pass the parameters in a function. I hope everyone is clear with all these 3, right? All right then. The next thing we are going to study about functions is function overloading, right? The next thing is function overloading. So what is function overloading? Function overloading means same name of the functions, different functions that have same name, right? But then again, because they are different functions, obviously the actions that they will be performing will also be different, right? Essay functions which have the same name but the action that they are performing is different. That's called function overloading, right? Meaning this is, actually we have studied one property of object oriented classes which is called polymorphism, right? So this function overloading, when we talk about, that's one kind of polymorphism. Okay, that's a kind of polymorphism in C++, right? So what is the meaning of polymorphism? We have already discussed. Polymorphism means one that exists in many forms, right? Do you get my point? Something that exists in many forms, that's called polymorphism, right? So when I talk about this function overloading, right, as I say, the name of the function will be same, but it will be performing different actions, right? That's why this is called polymorphism. Now let's understand how this works. ठीक है? मेरे पास एक I have let me say I have to create a function. ठीक है, कोई function create करना था. That's void add. ठीक है, या टेस्ट नाम का कोई एक फंक्शन ले लेते हैं, void test, and I pass one integer in this, right? एक और then I write another prototype in which I say I'm writing void test and I'm passing two. Oh, just a second. Yes, and I'm passing two integers as parameter, right? So this will be the form of function overloading, right? Now I have two different functions. One is test with one argument and the other one is test with two arguments, right? So these two will be considered. क्या C में इनको different consider करते थे? No, the C compiler will give me compile time error in this case. But when I talk about C++, right, this thing is absolutely and 100% valid, right? You can have two functions with same name when you talk about C++. So this thing is very much valid in C++, right? And you can perform two different actions in these two different uh, functions, right? So मैंने एक main बनाया, I make a main function, right? And let me say I have two variables here, int a comma b, c in, 1 minute, c in a and b, right? I make a call to the test function, right? if I have to make a call to the test function with one argument, how will its call be? उसकी call कैसे होगी? When I talk about this test function, how will I make a call to this test? बताओ इसकी call कैसे होगी? Can I say I'll write it as int test and I'll pass only one parameter in this particular call? Just one argument will be passed, right? And of course, for the second one, I'll pass two arguments, a comma b, right? So with the help of the call, I can very well distinguish, let me say this is number one and this is number two, right? When I look at the call, I can very well comprehend that this one is the call to first definition and this one will be the call to second definition, right? Okay, so let me say this is the end of the main, and then again let me define these tests. Void uh, test. If there is one argument that is passed, I'll receive one argument, and let me say cout x. Right, this is one definition, and then again let me say second definition of test with two arguments int x comma int y. Right, cout x y. Right, so these are the two definitions of x and y. So can I say these two definitions are performing different actions? This is printing 1x and this is printing two values, right? So in all, these two are performing different actions, right? Now when I look at the main, again when we start execution of the main, right, main में two variables will be created. You take the input and then again test with single argument. When the call is made to test with single argument, the call is transferred over to this definition, right, and the value of x will be printed on the screen. Then again the next call is with test with two arguments. So can I say this time the call will be transferred to this particular definition and whatever is written inside here will be executed, right? So I hope you understand how does the compiler differentiate between the two, which definition has to be executed, कैसे differentiate हो रहा है, can you comprehend that? How are we able to comprehend which definition of test has to be executed? Can I say based on the call? And in the call, we look at the arguments that are being passed to the function. Do you get my point? So we are looking at the number of arguments that are being passed to that function to comprehend which definition has to be called. Right, so that's one way of implementing function overloading based on the number of arguments that you pass in your program. Do you understand this? Yes, is it clear to everyone? I'll come to that also, Mritula. I'll come to that. We'll discuss all the cases. Right. So let's just implement this on the compiler also, and we'll discuss each and every case that follows, right? Okay. So we were talking about function overloading. Right. So it's hash include IO stream using namespace std, and let me say I have two functions, void test, right, with one argument, and there's another void test with two integer arguments, right? And then I have a main function in that a comma b, these are the two variables, a in a and b. I call test with a and I call test with b, a comma b, right? Then let me give the definitions of test. Int x, right? Cout x equal to and endl, right? And another test which will receive two arguments, right? Cout x comma y equal to, this is x and y, right? So when I execute this, you can see the code has compiled without any error. That means it is accepting the two definitions of test, right? Let me enter the values 2 and 3, right? So x equal to 2 and y equal to 2, 3. Is it clear to everyone? So how did the compiler distinguish? Now again, here it is the responsibility of the compiler to comprehend which call or which definition has to be made, right? Then again, at the time of compilation itself, looking at the function call, compiler will link those definitions, right? When the compiler sees test with one argument, it will link this call with this particular definition of test with one argument. When it looks at the this call with two arguments, two parameters, it will link that call with this particular definition of test. Is it clear to everyone? Right? So again, if I talk about the function overloading, the first differentiator is the number of parameters. So how does the compiler differentiate? Based on the number of parameters, right? Acha, now if I ask you, let me say I have another test, void test, and this has no arguments in it. Can this also be considered as open? So let me say void test without any arguments and cout message, right? Is this also overloading? Tell me, will this be considered as overloading? Yes. This will also be considered as function overloading. How? So there are three different definitions of test. One without any argument, one with one argument, and second one with two arguments. Right? So when I talk about the first test, this one without any argument, what will be displayed on the screen? Can you tell me? What will be displayed this time if I make the call to this test? Yes? Can I say this message will be printed on the screen? Right? So if I execute, ओहो क्या कहाँ गड़बड़ करी है? अच्छा, right. So if I execute this program, you can see first thing is message is printed on the screen, then x equal to 2, x equal to 2 and 5. Right? Why? Because this definition, this call of test was linked with this definition of test without any arguments. Right? So based on the number of parameters, you can implement function overloading. That's the first thing, right? Now, second thing, again, this is the number of parameters. Second thing can depend on the type of arguments that you pass, right? So let me say, if I have something like a void test int and void test float, right? One is void test int and other one is void test float. Will this be considered as function overloading? So let's check that. One is int a and second one, let me take it as float b, right? C in a b, again a, and in the second let me pass b, right? This is a float type argument, this is an integer type argument, right? So instead of this will be received as float x, right? So I'm printing that value float, right? तो यहाँ पे चलो ये लिख देते हैं float x equal to x. If I execute, right, one message, second one is, let me say 5.8 and enter. You can see message x equal to 2 and then float x equal to 5.8. The program has compiled without any error, right? So second thing with which we can implement function overloading, can I say it's the type of arguments that we pass, right? So one is the number of parameters, second one is the type of the parameters or the arguments that you pass in the function. So these two are the differentiators, or these two, no, this is not possible in C. That's a concept of object oriented, right? And C is not object oriented. So do you understand this thing, how we can implement function overloading? So there are two ways. One is the number of parameters and second is the type of parameters. Yes. Now, the question that Mridula was asking. If my first function takes integer, comma, float as argument and second takes float, comma, integer as argument, will this still be considered as function overloading? अभी भी इसको function overloading consider करेंगे हम. The order of parameters is different. Yes, है ना? Because again the type varies, right? First one is integer, first one is float here. So again type of arguments vary in these two definitions, right? So again we can check it, a comma b, and let me take the second call as b comma a, right? ये हटा देते हैं यहाँ से. So void int x comma int y, right? X comma, that's float y, okay, and space, okay, y, right? And in the second definition, first is float and second argument is int y. So float x is this, and let me take the second argument as y. Let's just execute. क्या कर दिया ये? कुछ गड़बड़ करी? अच्छा ये int है ना, int था, this should be int float, right? This should be int float, right? You can see now again this is compiled without any error. तो अगर कोई input भी दोगे 4 and second one is 7.9 maybe, so enter, you can see it is executing perfectly fine, right? So order of the arguments also matter when you talk about function overloading. Is it clear to everyone? Yes. Acha, there is one question for you, right? If I change the return type of any of the function, ठीक है, ये लिया मैंने void test int float, and then I write something like int test int float. Rest everything is the same, right? All I'm changing is the return type of these two functions. Will it still be considered as function overloading? Int? Yes. Think about it again. How does the compiler differentiate? Compiler कैसे differentiate करता है between the function definitions? How does the compiler differentiate between the different definitions of test? Can I say the compiler distinguishes with the help of function call? Right. It's based on the function call that the compiler is able to differentiate between the definitions, right? We are linking the call with that particular definition. Right. But in the call, do we have any specification for the return type? No, we don't. Right? There is nothing, we do not mention any return type in the call. So that means these two will not be considered as function overloading. Right? You can check it even, right? Look at this. So it has given error. Ambiguity new declaration of int test, right? That means the compiler is confused between these two definitions of test. It's not able to differentiate when the only difference is the return type. Do you get my point? It's in front of you, right? In test and void test, it's saying it is ambiguous. Is it clear? अच्छा यही अगर मैं पूछूं, I had to pass an array, right? So how many ways are there to pass an array to a function? Array को pass करने के कितने methods हैं? Can I say using a pointer and using the square brackets? Both the ways we can pass an array, right? So मैंने लिया int star a, and second one I'm writing int a with square brackets. तो क्या ये दोनों function overloading है? Will these two be considered as overloading? Or it's the same? Tell me. क्या ये function overloading है? Can I say the call to this particular, either it's a pointer or you're passing it using the square brackets, it's the same thing, right? तो कॉल भी दोनों का इसी तरह से होगा, टेस्ट ए कॉमा टेस्ट ए. So will I be able to differentiate between these two? The answer is no, right? So in case of both are the different ways to pass an array to the function, so this also would not be considered as function overloading. Clear? अच्छा आप मुझे बताओ, कल हमने कॉल बाय रेफरेंस भी पढ़ा था. We have studied about call by reference also yesterday, right? So एक हुआ void test A and second one is void test ampersand A. Will this be considered as overloading? These two. One is I'm passing the copy of the variable, and second I'm passing the reference of that particular variable. So will this be considered as overloading? Think about it. Is this overloading? One is passing the normal variable and the other one is passing the reference. Again, can I say this also is not overloading? Why? अगर normal variable भी pass करना है, so I'll pass it as test A, and if I have to pass reference also, that also goes as test A, है ना? So both of them, these two are also not considered as overloading. Is it clear? Take a minute with this. If there is any doubt, please let me know. That's the whole concept of function overloading in C++, right? And as I said, that's a concept of object-oriented programming, which we studied polymorphism. है ना? ये polymorphism एक concept होता है, something which exists in many forms. So same name of function which can perform multiple actions that you need, that's called function overloading. देखो इसको एक मिनट, कुछ है डाउट तो पूछो. Shall we move forward then? Yes, ma'am, we should. Okay. Thank you. Right. So we were discussing about function overloading, right? So again, uh, functions that have same name and different actions, right? And second property क्या थी? This is a kind of polymorphism, and that too static polymorphism, right? What kind of polymorphism it is? Static polymorphism. Why static polymorphism? Static polymorphism क्यों बोलते हैं इसको? When I talk about static, हमें ये पता है ना, something which is in the hands of compiler at the time of compilation, that is taken care of, is called static, है ना? So here the differentiating between the different definitions of function is the responsibility of compiler, right? तो कंपाइलर की रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी है, इसलिए हम इसको क्या बोलते हैं? स्टैटिक पॉलीमॉर्फिज्म, राइट? देन अगेन, हाउ डू यू डिफरेंशिएट? कंपाइलर कैसे डिफरेंशिएट करता है? कंपाइलर डिस्टिंग्विशेस बेस्ड ऑन, differentiates based on number of, either number of arguments, right? Or second is the type of arguments. That these are the two things how the compiler differentiates between different function definitions or function calls, right? So that's all about the function overloading, right? One more thing about the functions that we have to study. The next thing is default argument, right? The next thing that we have to study about the functions is default arguments. अब क्या होता है default arguments? Let me say एक काम करते हैं यहीं पे कंपाइलर पे ही करते हैं सीधा इसको. हाँ जी. Next, let's talk about the default arguments now. Right? What are default arguments? Let me say I have a function named test, right? And it takes one argument, right? And in the main again, I'm defining this int a, int a, cin a, right? Then I make a call to the test with this a, right? अब क्या होगा? The call is made to the test function. Int a is received, and you can output the value of a, right? So क्या होगा? Whatever value you have input from here will be displayed, will be passed on further, and it will be displayed, right? That's what happens normally, right? यही चीज होगी. That's a very simple program. Whatever value you will feed, it will output the same, and it is done, right? But what if I don't want to use the C in A here? यहाँ पे मैंने C in A नहीं यूज किया, int A नहीं यूज किया. नहीं, कुछ गड़बड़ कर रही हूँ मैं. 1 minute. तो हमने क्या किया? Yes, there is a variable to define किया int A, but I am not feeding any value to this variable A. Rather, what I did, I assign the value from here. I've set a default value for it. Let me say int equal to 90. Right? मैंने क्या कर दिया? At the time of prototype itself, I have given a value int equal to 90. Right? और ये a यहाँ से pass कर दिया and yes. Right? So let's see how it works. Now let me execute. 0 आ गया ये. एक second. एक मिनट, मैं कुछ गड़बड़ कर रही हूँ यहाँ पे. 1 minute. Now it works, right? So what happens is, again, I've given a default value inside the declaration, that is int equal to 90, right? When I call this function from the main, I'm calling it as test. कोई भी value यहाँ से pass नहीं करी. But then again, I'm receiving certain value of a when I'm making a call to this particular definition of test. A की definition थी मेरे पास. That's with one argument, right? But can you see, when I call the test without any argument, it is not giving any error here. ये observe कर पा रहे हो यहाँ पे? I have made a call to the test without any argument, but I had only one definition. है ना? Normally, अच्छा, ये चीज पहले समझ लो. I am giving a prototype here with one argument. I'm going to the main. I call it as without any argument. But मेरे पास definition कौन सी है? With one parameter itself. So if I run it, it is going to give me an error. ठीक है? By default ये क्या देगा? Error देगा. Why? Because the compiler says I cannot match this call to any definition that is given. Are you able to understand this thing? हमेशा हम क्या बोल रहे थे अभी तक? In case of overloading, the compiler matches the call with whatever definition it can. ठीक है? अब मैंने call तो किसकी दे दी? Without any argument. But do I have any such definition in my function? No. I do not have any such definition in my program. So the compiler has given me error too few arguments in test. ठीक है, इस कॉल में आपने कोई भी आर्ग्यूमेंट नहीं दिए, right? So in that case, what can I do? I can give certain default value to my program. So what will I do? When I've given this prototype, in the prototype, I'll mention it as equal to 90, right? So अब क्या होगा? Although I am making a call to test without any argument, it will still execute this definition. Why? Because this A is able to receive the argument from the prototype, which is set as 90. So now when I execute it, you can see the answer is 90. Do you understand this? This is called the default argument. That means मैंने preset करके रखी है कोई value. I have preset the value of certain variables in the prototype itself. Do you get my point? If the type is different, meaning int की जगह float होता तो फिर वो गड़बड़ हो गया ना. You're saying if here instead of int I have a float. So it's again, that's a mismatch, total mismatch of overloading. तो मुझे float, अगर यहाँ पे float वाला होता तो I could have used it. अभी फिर से ये error दे देगा, right? Because the types are different, undefined. Do you understand this? Yes, it will be overwritten, of course. Now this is int a, and let me say int a equal to 20, and I pass a value a from here. So definitely it will be overwritten. Oh, abhi bhi float likh diya na. There should be int. Right. So yes, definitely it is overwritten. Now it has a value 20. Right? Right. So sometimes if I have to set some default value, है ना, कोई minimum value set करके देनी है मुझे, so I can make use of default arguments in that case. Right? I can later on change it, but then again, as I said, if I have to set some minimum value for something, so that's how I can set it through default arguments. Right? And one more thing, again, let me say I have two integers here, int comma int a comma int b, right? So that also can be done. कोई भी value pass अगर मैं ना करूं चलेगा, int 90 and int 100 maybe. So that will also execute. Fine, ठीक है? A और B की दोनों की default values it will take. But then again, what if I keep the value as of 90 as first or 100 मैं skip कर दूं? Can I do this? I'm passing the value for A as 90 and I'm not passing any value for B. क्या ये चीज काम करेगी? No. This is not going to work for me. Right? This will give me an error. What happens is when you're talking about the default arguments should always go from the from right to left. ठीक है, default arguments हमेशा right से left जाती हैं. You can skip the first one, but if you are not adding anything to the second, that will give you an error. तो A मैं यहाँ से pass कर सकती हूँ, B I can take from the previous one, right? तो इस तरह से it is going to work. Clear? बाकी दोबारा डिस्कस कर लेंगे. भेजो यहाँ अमित, send your code here. Right? If there is any doubt, please let me know. Otherwise, you can leave the session. Yes, B will give you 90. Okay, B will give you the value 90 because you are not passing any argument for B. Right? All I'm trying to say is, अगर आप किसी एक की value add करते हो, if you are sending only one value from the default argument, right? Second आपको यहाँ से pass करना पड़ेगा, you'll have to pass the second one from the call. But we know if there is only one argument, it is definitely going to, the order matters, right? It will definitely go inside A. So what about B now, right? So this form is not acceptable, right? If you want to skip the arguments, you can skip something which is on the left side, and right should always be given, right? Take care. You can leave the session, everyone. Thank you everyone. Malloc use कर रहा है ये. एक काम, have you two आदित्य, अमित एक काम करो, व्हाट्सएप करो इसको, I'll check it.